Okay. Hello, comrades. Thank you guys for joining me today. We're about to get started with our Marxism 102. We are live streaming this, so bear with us with the technology. We wanted to make this as accessible as possible, and that way, if you didn't catch anything, because 102, we do go over a lot more than we did in 101. You can go back and watch it. It's at our People's Education Program YouTube. We will be starting like an All Power Books YouTube, but right now we're just going through our People's Education Program for our educational events. I just want to do a quick round of hands for everyone who's at the 101 class, just to make sure. Okay, cool, good job. Welcome back, and then welcome to anyone who's at 102. Don't worry, we will be going over just really briefly what we touched on last week. Oh yeah, so my name is Savannah. If you haven't met me before, I'm one of the organizers here at All Power Books. It's an honor to have you guys here. I think I went over at the Marxism class that it's amazing to see people taking time out of the day, especially on like a Thursday night when you could be doing, literally anything else. I super, super appreciate it, and it just gives me so much hope. So without further ado, let's get started. Okay. So, what we went over last week, we went over who Karl Marx was, the history of economic systems, personal versus private property, the means of production, and then the three different economic systems: capitalism, socialism, and communism. So, we learned that Karl Marx was a philosopher and economic theorist that lived in the 1800s. He didn't invent socialism or communism, but he observed and recorded different struggles that he had during his time, and critiqued capitalism in a way that is super universally applicable to different contexts over geographies. We also learned that the history of economic systems went so far as like there was slavery into feudalism, into capitalism, hopefully into socialism, and then ultimately communism. We learned how those would transition into each other. And what that consisted of was mostly through class conflict, which you don't learn about a lot about in school. A lot of it is talked about like, great people of history, the great man theory, where it's like one person changed the world. We learned that ultimately all of history has been changed through the conflict between oppressors and the oppressed. So we learned the difference between personal and private property. Personal property being the things that belong to you, like your cell phone, your car. It's like movable items that essentially belong to you. So we learned that when people say, oh, I don't want socialism, I don't want them to take my house or my toothbrush, we learned that there's a difference between personal property and then private property. And private property is items that can be used to generate wealth and profit. Also, 101 is on YouTube. Unfortunately, we went live super early, so there's like 30 minutes of just nothing. But then it gets really good and it starts. So you can go over all the things that we learned. We learned together. We had people present on the two classes, the bourgeoisie and the proletariat. We had all of these new like production worker, restaurant server, influencer, athlete, stripper, receptionist, these kind of things, and we layered them on a graph that was titled like proletariat, bourgeoisie, and then in between was the class traders, and that's usually like the military or the police, people who are from the working class that sign up to defend the bourgeoisie. So, capitalism, it's the system we live in now. It fucking sucks, and that's why we're all here. I don't think I need to explain it. It's just the ultimate, it's like profit accumulation, infinite growth on a finite planet. Socialism is the transition from capitalism into communism, and communism is ultimately the moneyless, classless, and stateless society. So, any questions on anything that we went over in 101, or if you'd like me to clarify it further? Yes.
Fundamental difference between personal property is it's like you can commodify private property.
Yes. Oh, okay. Essentially. Marx goes way more into it, And again, these are 101 and 102 classes, and they're actually done at an 8th grade reading level because I wanted it to be extremely accessible. If you have any further questions on any of these systems or any of like the economics questions, highly recommend. There's nothing that like beats reading Marx's Capital. We also have very accessible versions of it. We have Capital Illustrated, so it's like a comic book to understand capital. Yeah, it's pretty good. It's one of our best sellers actually here. We also have a People's Guide to Capitalism, and we have our All Power Press Fundamentals of Marxism. It's 4 different essays put into a book that we put together to help people understand Marxism better. All right, does someone want to read this quote? Just shout it out. That is right. So we love Marx because he wasn't a regular philosopher. He was a cool philosopher. So he wanted to change it. Through his activism and practice, Marx developed political theory that completely flipped the scripts on previous philosophers. So Marx was a student of Hegel. So a lot of his work was a critique of Hegel, who was a philosopher. And Hegel really pushed forward this like idealism idea that like, we'll get into it more, but he basically took that and developed it. And that's why we love Marx so much today. So these theories are as follows. And this is what we're going over in this class. We're going to be going over dialectical and historical materialism, which is a mouthful, but I hope to explain it in a way that is easy to understand. If not, we'll work on it. It's a lot. I mean, people have been studying Marx for decades, and they still can't find a simple way to explain it, and everyone has, interprets it in different ways. We're going to go over the labor theory of value, surplus value, the theory of alienation, and revolutionary theory. So that's what we're going to go over today. And it is a lot. So I didn't mention on the All Power page, but on my personal page, people who brought notebooks, you might want to take notes or take photos on your phone of the slides. It's a lot of information. I tried to condense it, like I said, in like a very like 8th grade reading level, but it's still, these concepts are much bigger than I'm going to explain now. This is just the easiest way we could get it across. So we're going to get into dialectical materialism. So dialectical materialism is all about understanding the world by forming arguments which are based on material, factual evidence. And that seems so obvious, right? But back in the day, like I said, Hegel was he emphasized thoughts, like ideas were the primary way human beings ran the world. So we're going to break down dialectical materialism into its 2 parts. Materialism, obviously, it's the scientifically verifiable concrete reality. So it's not like opinions, ideas, or spirituality. It's real world conditions like social class, nationality, gender, things you can touch, things you can taste, things you can smell. Whereas like idealism would be spirituality or like ideas, thoughts, beliefs. So dialectics is the search for truth and the analysis of contradictions or conflicting opposing forces and how these drive change. So dialectics is obviously the more important part of dialectical materialism. We use materialism, the real things that happen in the real world, dialectically to explain the world around us and to analyze it. So dialectic comes from the Greek word of dialogue or to argue, and we'll get into this a little bit more. But it is this contradiction, this push and this pull. It's like the yin and yang of ideal and material, the push and pull of science and belief, the circle of how and why. So a lot of times dialectics could be explained as like the oppressed versus the oppressor, or the working class versus the owning class. Just 2 opposites that collide that create something new. What is the material? Again, it's things you can like touch, taste, all the sensory things. So food, water, shelter, the interactions we have, the chairs we're sitting on, the building that we're in. That is the material world that we live in. And people have material needs, right? Obviously, they need all these things to be able to survive. Developments in society, as Marx had claimed, are a product of the conflicts that arise when groups with different material interests engage and compete with each other. So we can look back at history and we can see that the slave versus the slave master, that was a conflict of interest. That was a small minority that was overthrown by a larger minority. Serfs and landlords, things like that, it's always like the two classes in conflict. I'm going to scooch so I can see this a little bit better. Often in capitalism, as we will definitely be able to drive home today, we're like, we don't focus so much on the material. We focus a lot on like the ideas and the hopes and the dreams that we have, the way we want to imagine the world, not so much what it is materially. We're raised to believe in the ideation of things to be divorced from the concrete material reality of our economic system. And that becomes clear every day, and that we're going to have a couple of examples for this. But we're going to get more into being able to tell the difference between the ideal and the material. So the ideal is ideas, concepts, beliefs, spirituality, things like this. And Marx didn't say that this wasn't important. We're not saying it's materialism versus idealism. That's where the dialectics comes in. Marx said that both are just as important. So cultural beliefs, this is just kind of the difference. There's idealism and materialism. It's the cultural beliefs and ideas. Under Hegel, he would say that cultural beliefs and ideas drive economic change. Somebody has a good idea, puts it into the world, and the world is different. Materialists would say economic conditions drive cultural change and ideas. You can only have an idea based on where you grew up, how you interact with the world around you, whether or not you're oppressed, things like this. Hegel and idealists would say ideas shape the world, whereas reality exists outside of human perception. Whether or not you believe in something, there is a reality that exists, whether or not you want to believe in it. And that's where like the scientific socialism comes in, where we're based in the material, scientifically verifiable, empirical reality, which is why I love Marxism so much, because it's just like, doy, you know? History is shaped by great people with great ideas versus history is shaped by the material conditions of society. Materialism holds that ideas are informed by the person's economic, social, and cultural conditions around them. So we take this into account quite a bit as Marxists. We use the dialectics of what we want the world to be, what people think of the world, how people talk about the world, and we combine it with this push and pull, this argument, this dialogue in our heads to find the answer. Marxists focus on materialism because it's a powerful way to explain things. So when studying society, obviously it's important to back it up with scientific claims. Otherwise, you get lost in this, what is morality? What is good versus evil? Something I think about all the time, and I hope everyone's on the same page here, but a lot of Zionists would say that they are the good guys. They genuinely, with all of their heart, believe that they are good and pure, while massacring children, men, women, elderly, all different kinds of people, like regardless. So at some point, we have to realize that there has to be a scientific definition of what is good and evil, because we can't rely on belief, because some people believe that they're doing good by killing people. And so that's something that I always think is interesting with Marxism, is like we don't have to rely so much on how we feel or how we want the world to be. By looking at the real factors that influence historical changes, we can understand how society evolves in a real way. And that's why they tell us that Marxism is so evil. They want us to believe that America is the freest country in the world. I love the reaction too, by the way. So, dialectics, going back to that, remember we learned what material is in dialectical materialism. This is something that's so important to Marxism. Dialectics is the push and the pull of contradiction. It's the art of investigating or discussing the truth of opinions, an inquiry into contradictions and their solution. So a lot of times we'll look, all right, so Zionists believe that they're good and pure, they're God's chosen people, and I didn't really want to use them as an example, but it's just so easy, they're just right there. we have to investigate. We have to understand these certain things. Where did this conflict start? How did it arise? Who has the power? Who has the weapons? Who has the funding? These are things that Marxists will look into to make sure we understand the full picture. Because if you're just getting, it's a war of religion, it's a war of race, all these things, these ideas, these ideations of what society is, you're never going to get the full truth. And we want the truth because we want to be able to find the truth, analyze society in a way we can, and then change it for the better. Dialectics says that the material shapes the ideal, but the ideal also shapes the material. So it's not so completely focused. Remember, we take all things into account. These forces are interactive, but because our world is made up of matter and matter takes primacy over ideas, our ideas do not exist independently outside of our reality. Zionism is as powerful as it is because of the funding that it gets, sort of thing. When different forces in nature, like in the material world, things you can touch, when they come into conflict, their interactions create something new. And that I can explain more onto. We're gonna drive this home because it is something that is so important. So something that I kind of considered, this wasn't in my, like the first time I did this class, I didn't add the base and superstructure because it is a little bit more complex, but I believe in you guys. And I think that it does help to sort of solidify why idealism also takes precedent, why we don't just reject it 100%. So we've got ideology. It's a superstructure. It's this world of ideas. So it's religion, culture, philosophy. Marx goes into this way more. We also have a great book called, I think we might be out of it, but it helped me understand this quite a bit. It's Marxism, Leninism. It's a study of it. It's the actual textbook that they use in Vietnam to teach their youth these concepts so that they can analyze society. And they have a great graph. It's super incredible. Highly recommend. But what we understand is that the material world shapes and maintains the idealistic world, like the social norms, your morals and values, your politics, the media, arts and education. But these also maintain and legitimize the material world. So like our culture, our social norms, think of the United States of America. It's a very individualistic society. It's a very success-driven society. All these things maintain and legitimize why billionaires own all of the means of production. For example, they worked hard to get there. That's an idea. That's idealism right there. So this is just something within Marxist philosophy that how he explains how they work together and the dialectics of these things. Oh, yep, sorry, I forget the videos just play right away. I don't know how the volume is, so we forgot to run this through before y'all got here. I'm gonna play a video. We're gonna adjust the volume. You can read the captions as they play, so just bear with me. This is Professor Richard Wolff explaining, yeah, he's great, explaining what I'm explaining, but probably in a better way. He's a professor and I'm just a guy, so. Oh yeah, it's completely silent. 1 second. So does anyone have any questions about the base or superstructure or how the material shapes the ideal and the ideal shapes the material? Did I explain it well? Okay, cool. Yes. It's definitely a difficult thing. What I feel like I didn't understand dialectical materialism for like a good 2 years. 2 years into calling myself a communist. I was like, I'm a communist. And somebody would be like, what's dialectical materialism? I'd be like, fuck if I know. You know what I mean? Like, I can't explain it. So it does take a while to understand and to actually apply to your life. But a lot of you do dialectical materialism all day, every day, anyways. I forget who says it. Oh, yes. Yeah.
Yeah, because I'm also trying to like understand this, like the thought from like my understanding. Are you saying that the material is more? By my understanding, are you saying that that material is more important than ideas, but both go hand in hand? But are you? Yeah. Like, is the material conditions more important than the ideas? Because I always thought that dialectical materialism was the material that influences the ideas, and not the ideas that influences the material. Yeah. So yeah, I just want your response to that.
Yeah, that's great because it does definitely seem that way because we have such an emphasis on scientific material reality. But what Marx tries to explain is that one isn't more important, but definitely your material conditions will shape your ideas. You're not just born into the world and thoughts just come to you about politics and culture and war and things like this. You are presented with these ideas as you are grown and shaped as a person. So it's hard to say. One isn't more important, but before Marx, there was a really big train of thought that was just ideas and culture and philosophy and the great thinkers of the world, but they totally didn't bring material reality into it. So one isn't more important. They just work kind of in tandem and they maintain and legitimize each other, if that makes sense. While also, I hate, like, it's so annoying because then I'm like, but then, like, the material reality is so important. It's just like it's more through, like, the lens of your material conditions. You know what I mean? Like, that's just the Marxist philosophy. Everyone can obviously think however they think. This is just an intro. So let's see if the volume is right. Fingers crossed.
Can you give a brief explanation of dialectical materialism?
He comes out of a school of thought that believed that ideas were the supreme achievement of human beings. Ideas are what you get from the most refined reflection that the human brain can do. If you're religiously oriented, ideas are what you get from God, from the spiritual realm. And so the world is really shaped by something prior to the world, namely ideas. So the notion is, sometimes called idealism, that the real world is the product of ideas. And if you want to really understand the real world, go to the ideas that make it what it is. Religiously, in the beginning, there was nothing. Then there was first God, which is a non-material idea, and that creates the world. Remember, in Genesis, 7 days, God, a spirituality, creates the materiality of the world. Marx rejected that. For him, the material is just as important as the ideal. If you want to see where the material comes from, it's shaped by ideas. But, and here comes his radicalism, it runs the other way too. The ideas don't come from nowhere. They come out of the real world. The ideas we have as people have to do with the real material problems we have as human beings and how we solve them. Where do we get our food? Where do we get our shelter? How do we get protection as little children from the elements, from our parents? All of these real material matters of life and survival are shaping our ideas every bit as much as our ideas shape the reality. Dialectical materialism is the name for a point of view that says, if you want to understand the world, you need to look at how ideas shape the material, but the other way too, and the two have interact. That's the way to see the world. And for that reason, when it came to explaining the problems of capitalism, he never could and never did suggest it's all because of the ideas of people about capitalism. It's the real way human beings make their food, solve their clothing problems, their relationship problems that shape their ideas as much. And he was going to analyze capitalism through that lens of the interaction of ideas and concrete material reality back and forth.
Sorry, I felt loud. So he explains it a little bit better. So we're going to just get into a couple examples. This is a just really basic conversation that I would say would be a dialogue. So let's say somebody says, Jeff Bezos is self-made and started Amazon in a garage. That is the American dream, people. Pack it up, pack it up. Using dialectical materialism as an argument, it would be somebody responding to that. Jeff Bezos was born into a wealthy family that owned their house, and they gave him a loan of $245,000. That's just some information that I think is a little bit important to the story of the idea of, wow, I had no clue, but he still had the idea to start Amazon and worked hard to get where he is today. Someone would say to that, he undervalued every employee that ever worked for him. Amazon would still just be an idea without the labor and exploitation of others. Dun, 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 dun. So yeah, that's just, a quick little example of like how a dialogue would start, how it would go back and forth from starting with just some idea of what it is. Where would humanity be if we didn't question how the fruit came to be? Where would humanity be if we didn't question how the fruit came to be and what factors made it grow? Is essentially dialectical materialism. When you have to figure out, here's a strawberry. Where did it come from? How did it grow? I've never seen a strawberry before. You would know, obviously, through maybe, human culture and thought and passing this down, you would know that there needs to be two contradictions that happen. You would need soil, something dry, something, loose like soil, and then to tie it with its opposite, water. Water and soil combine, a little sunshine creates growth. So that's dialectical materialism. It's the two contradictions going against each other and creating something new. Just as a little thing. So here's another example of an ideation or something that people would put in the ideal a lot of capitalists use. America is the land of the free. We've heard that. It's been beaten into us since we were children. Everyone still to this day thinks we fight wars for freedom. We are defending our freedom. But we all know that's not true. But how do we find that out? We just know, you have to do your research. You have to look into the material conditions of the world, because just saying that America is free doesn't make it free. We know that there's 1.8 million people in prisons. They're doing uncompensated or free labor for corporations. 1 out of every 100 human beings is in a cage. 22% of the world's prison population is in the US, while we're only 5% of the world's population. Housing, food, healthcare isn't a human right. Penalties rely on fines, and that means that these laws only exist for the poor. So how free are we? That's an example of dialectical materialism. There is an idea, and we just challenged it with factual freaking evidence. So here's something that I thought was really funny that we've been seeing in the current developments. There's this idea that the Democrats are communists, right? Put forth by someone who has millions and millions and millions of followers who are probably going to believe this. As Marxists, we know Kamala Harris is a neoliberal freaking scumbag, but it's just so funny. Donald Trump can just say this idea. People have this idea of what communism without doing the arguments or doing the dialogue with people to understand where and why and how it came to be. Something that's so funny and why ideas can't take precedent, you have to have both, is because not only are the Democrats communist, but the Republicans are communist. Trump is a communist. Didn't you know? What is communism? It means whatever you want it to mean in this postmodern idealistic society, right? We have this actual Contra death squad fled communism without, understanding her material conditions. She comes from, her family owns plantations. Her family is part of Contras. They were US funded, US backed, all these things. Living off of the backs of the people in her country, fled to the United States with this story. I fled communism. So yeah, that's why sometimes you can't rely so much on just feelings, thoughts, beliefs, what you want it to be. So we're going to have a little bit of a group discussion. We're going to use what we learned about dialectical materialism, and we're going to talk about homelessness in Los Angeles. So I'm going to ask a couple questions, and I really hope I get some dialogue back. We're going to start with, if anyone wants to go, what are some assumptions about homelessness based on the ideal? Any ideas you've heard? Just an idea. It could be good or bad, because that's the whole thing. Just because somebody has an idea, I have a lot of ideas about things that aren't necessarily bad, but they're still ideas. You still have to work through them with the material reality. Was that just a question? Did I hear somebody shout something out? Just yell it. That they are lazy and they don't want to work. That is an ideation of homelessness. Anyone else? They've made bad choices. It's a moral failure. They're violent drug addicts. Whew. Mental health issues, for sure. They'll rob you, yes. I mean, not yes, I'm not agreeing, but that is an ideation of homelessness. Yes, it's a choice. Homelessness is a choice. These are all ideas. They don't necessarily have any basis in reality, but they are, if you go on to any news channel, you're going to see someone saying something like this. Matisse, did you have your hand up? I didn't hear that. Oh, yeah. Financially irresponsible. So how can we counter that? What can we learn about homelessness based on the material? What are some material things based on or about homelessness in Los Angeles? Medical debt. Yes, a lot of times your medical debt can cause you to lose your house and you can end up on the street. I know this one's going to be hard because I know we're not pulling up facts and figures, but essentially just like how does the material reality of capitalism create homelessness? Anyone? What is it? Stagnant wages, for sure, for sure. Exploitation, absolutely. Absolutely. So a lot of elderly people can't get Social Security and they end up being homeless because they can't afford their rent. Yes. Inflation? Constant inflation. Absolutely.
Oh, so like, yeah, don't mind him. He's just being a dog. But like, yeah, specifically something I wanted to point out, at least from the vantage point of like being an immigrant, there's a very weird and pervasive things that happens. Also for context, I'm South American, right? I remember very vividly when I was going to school, I was being told if you ever want to hope to make it out, as in make it as a person, you need to travel and go somewhere. And more often than not, they would say, oh, come to the US because that's where people are self made, right? So that's the first layer of it. The second layer, as an immigrant, you're always told you should be a model citizen. So basically, you know the stereotype of like how Asians excel at everything? It's kind of like that, but broadly speaking, for basically every immigrant ever. So I think it's worth mentioning that in terms of why it's so rampant, in terms of the relationship that people have in terms of success in this country. Because the expectation as an immigrant is that, well, if you're here, it's because you're here to succeed at something. When really, the reason why we're here actually in the first place is because of the messed up nature of how our home is, typically because of the US. So thought I would put that out there.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So yeah, a lot of here, Tony. Yeah. So yeah, a lot of material factors would be like the amount of empty homes there are versus the amount of homeless people there are, the exorbitant rent, the big amount of rent, all these things. So we're going to actually get into I did this group project. So we're going to split up into 3 groups. I'm going to count you guys out 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. And then we're going to have group 1 over here, 2 back here, 3 right here. And we're going to work through finding the ideal and the material. They don't have to be like, you don't have to look up facts and figures on your phone, but just know that like it's something that actually affects it of these different we're going to pick a topic for each group. You can pick one of these things and find something that is like the idealistic thought of it, and then like the material response to that, and have a dialogue with each other. So I'm going to count off, Tony, 1, let's see, I guess 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, Matisse, 3, 1, 2, 3, Kyle, 1, 2, 3, Esther, 1, 2, 3, 1. So if you guys could break up into your groups, we're going to get you guys a Sharpie, 1 over here. Wait, where did you say 1 is? So, for anyone on the live stream, hi, hello. We're doing a group project. People are picking one topic from here, and they're going to be discussing the material versus the ideal of this topic. It's kind of loose, it's kind of not so serious, but it's just to get us to understand the differences between idealism, materialism, and how they interact with each other. So it's going to be about 10 minutes. So go get a snack, hang tight. There's only 5 people, but still, hang tight. All right, comrades, let's get the last little bit of discussion out and let's start wrapping it up. If you have about like 4 examples, that works. Perfect. And then, if you guys will think amongst yourselves, you guys have to vote for one delegate to present to the class. Ooh. Ooh. Yeah, and it can't be Cat. All right. Hate to cut you off. I know the conversations must be dazzling, but we are going to get back up. If everyone can make their way back to their seats. I just don't want to keep you guys here for too long. I know there's places to go and people to see. Huh? Oh my gosh. All right. I don't want to be too authoritarian, but what'd you say, Weaver? Okay. All right, comrades, pack it up. This is the dictatorship of me right now. I'm just kidding. I kid. Awesome. So if everyone could pick one delegate for presentation. Your team number one? Excellent. Put your sign up right here. Sorry about the wind. Team number one, team number two, perfect. Yup. Actually, let's put them a little bit lower. Just so we can. Perfect. All right, team three. Oh, we got some good ones in here for the 6 people watching on live. Shouts out. Like and subscribe. Guys, we're famous. Yeah, come in next time. All right. Yeah, we have more than enough chairs. All right, team number one. Will you introduce yourself? Tell us your pronouns, and then I'm gonna ask you if you want to explain a little bit of what you guys talked about.
Check. Hi. Right here. Oh. Okay. Hi everyone. Javier. Hi. Nice to meet everyone. He, him, his pronouns. And for our group, we did for group number one, we did protest because it's very popular nowadays, right? Yeah. But the ideal, yeah, like image of protest, what we came of, right, is like what we see like going on in like the DNC right now or Palestinian protests, right? Because those are in the mainstream media right now, and the mainstream media is portraying us protesters as something that we're not, right? And then it's also on the internet, right? More propaganda on our side, right? On what we actually are demanding, right? As protesters, right? But what the mainstream media, right? What they're saying, or is that, or just anyone actually, is that we are demanding. Protesters are demanding. It's kind of true. Protesters are angry. It's kind of true, right? Either we're disorganized or organized, depending on who you guys ask. We are unlawful, which is kind of BS because sometimes we're literally just standing there and that's being unlawful. It's so bullshit, right? We are un-American. Well, by un-American, I hope they mean anti-capitalist because that's right, right? Yeah. They turn into riots. Sometimes they do, right? But sometimes we don't start it. It's the police that start it, right? Or the Zionists that start it, right? Actually, that happens a lot of the times. Almost always. You know what? Always. Fuck that shit, right? There's outside agitators. Protesters are bad or good, depending on who you ask. Yeah, anyways, all that stuff, right, is what we came up with. Just ideas, right? And on the material side is that, yeah, protesters can accomplish change, right? Like protests in the past, like unions, voting rights, environmental rights, and women's rights, right? That's has happened. Mass arrests, like at UCLA, the encampments. Mass surveillance, like at UCLA, the encampments, right? Destroy property, like at UCLA, the encampments, right? And university divestment, which hasn't happened at UCLA yet, but will, right? Yes. But yeah, that's basically what we came up with when the protests with the ideal and material side. Yeah.
Shout out team number one. I'm so glad they picked protest. It's so interesting. I'm glad everyone picked a different topic. It is cool. So we can work through the ideals of protest, what they say, and the material to find the synthesis of what a protest actually is and what it can actually accomplish by studying protests in the past, what worked, what didn't, etc. All right, team number two, name, pronouns, and a little explanation.
Hey y'all, I'm Jamie. Some people call me Bumblebee. I use they, them, aya pronouns. We chose to talk about public transportation. Some of the ideals that we thought up were slow and inconvenient. Everybody needs a car. It's good for the environment. It's dangerous or dirty or full of drug addicts. Our public transportation is sufficient, and that's why we don't have more of it. There's like this false dichotomy of it has to be either cars or public transportation, and public transportation is for poor people, and public transportation is for the public, right? I mean, that is itself an idea. Materially, going kind of in reverse order, it's not necessarily for the public because the public don't own it, the public don't operate it. Like we elect people who appoint people who then manage these things and very often subcontract out to private enterprise. So it's not necessarily even public, right? And then materially, it is generally better for the environment than cars, but that doesn't necessarily make it good for the environment, right? Because it still has emissions. It can be faster or can be slower than car transportation. It can be more affordable or it can be less affordable than car transportation, depending on the ubiquity of the service. So yeah, sometimes people are right when they say it's slow and inconvenient, but in other places, in other contexts, that's absolutely not the case. And in our own context, we could make that not the case if we chose to do that. I think that gets to most of what we talked about. Yeah.
Yeah, shout out Team 2. And I love it because it's like that totally gives us space to imagine a new world, right? How do we want public transportation to look like? All right, Team 3, who's your delegate? Ooh, a joint delegation. Love to see it. Let's go. I love this.
Yes.
Good.
Let us work together now. So hi, we're group 3. My name is Taylor, and this is...
Jasper.
All right. Well, Jazz, would you be so kind as to deliver the ideal for them?
What we have on the ideal list is, or for mental health, is that mental health can usually be seen to some people as an individual issue or problem. And then we have kind of the same thing. Mental health is not that big of an issue. Could be seen as just like a little health issue and nothing more. And that mental health could be seen as just a personal mindset weakness. Just change your mind a little and hope for the best.
Hope your way out of poverty, eh? Yeah. So I'm going to throw in here some kind of counters to these ideals from the material realm. We have economic systems have a huge impact on people's mental health, right? So if you don't have resources, it's hard to have good mental health. Additionally, we have the glorification of substance abuse, especially in some industries. For example, with music. A lot of our music celebrates people getting fucked up. That's maybe not healthy. Also, the problem of access to healthcare, it's limited. So not everybody can even get healthcare or afford healthcare or medicine. Additionally, we have a lack of support systems for mental health crises. So they'll send the police to shoot you instead of a medic. And then last few are healthcare often only treats the symptoms and not the causes. They'll give you an aspirin when you need a surgery. And mental health issues affect not just the individual, but everyone around them and our society. I make the analogy that healthy workers are productive workers, right? So yes, teamwork.
Fantastic. Oh my gosh, you guys did so good. I'm just going to move these down so I'll move them away so that the slides don't get messed up. There's going to be text that goes to the very bottom, so we'll prepare for that. Give yourselves a round of applause. Isn't it fun working in groups? Like I said, this is a real basic class, so we're going to get real elementary with it. All right, so moving on. I think we discussed the ideal and the material enough. Dialectical materialism being the conflict of the two, creating a whole new thing. So let me find out where I am. All right. So yeah, now we're going to get into applying dialectical materialism to history, which is another very important part of Marxism and why Marxists are so internationalist, so obsessed with history, so obsessed with things that came before. So historical materialism, everybody. Historical materialism is the application of dialectical materialism to world history and societal development. Oh, sorry guys, welcome. The general method is used by Marxists to understand the contradictions of class issues within societies, and we understand them as the motor for progress or social or historical transformation. So again, what we went over in 101 is class conflict was what sort of propelled society forward from slavery into feudalism into capitalism. So historical materialism, like we went over the progress of human history. We got Abracadaniel here. Did anyone watch Adventure Time? Okay, just us. Love Adventure Time. So basically, this is our little, it's a very elementary timeline, but this is essentially Marxian historical materialism. As conflicts arise in history, new forms of society come into existence. So whenever there's a conflict, that creates something new. So we went from the primitive economy, which is essentially like tribalism, communalism, into slavery with the advent of private property. Once people started being able to own things that generated wealth for them, including human beings. Into feudalism, into capitalism. Those little dots are the fact that slavery didn't necessarily end, and it still hasn't ended, so we just wanted to make that little point. So we can apply dialectical materialism to history to help understand it better. And we do that all day, every day. I think you guys do historical materialism without even knowing it, and we'll explain a little bit of this. So we're gonna go over an example in history of the idealistic, for example, just like American history. The idealist view that they push on us in school, the American Revolution was a war of independence, these just like buzzwords, right? For freedom and democracy against the British. The historical materialist view would say that the American Revolution was a revolution of the bourgeoisie. It was white landowners, right? And they refused to pay taxes. Of a white capitalist class from England. They wanted the ownership of stolen indigenous land, and they wanted to fight against paying taxes to the monarchy in England. That would be a historical materialist view of the American Revolution, rather than, oh, these people just wanted freedom. They wanted religious freedom. They wanted all these things. It was a bourgeois revolution for rich people. So yeah, the American Civil War was a war against slavery, right? It's just like, that's just how it's presented. It was like, what's his name? Abraham Lincoln did the thing, and the slaves are free and everyone was happy. It was a war between two conflicting modes of production. In the North, they had this burgeoning capitalist society, right? They had all of these, what are they called? These buildings with machines and factories. The Marxists that can't think of the word factories is so embarrassing. Slavery and capitalism waged between the southern slave-owning oligarchy and northern bourgeois capitalists over the colonial expansion westward. Karl Marx has a really great analysis of the American Civil War that describes these two modes of production in detail. This is just an example. So that would be a more materialist view of the American Civil War. So another example of historical materialism you hear all the time. Communism stars people because, fill in X country, Cuba, Vietnam, China, all these things. But what they leave out all of the time is the process, the material, tangible things that had happened to have created Cuba to be starving and underdeveloped. So this is straight off of the US government, that's a .gov website, and this explains why they put sanctions on, well, not why, this is a little, clipping of it, but they explain why they put sanctions on Cuba. Essentially, Cuba was an outpost for sugar plantations, tobacco, all these resources that the US wanted. It was a tax haven for rich people to be able to go party, and the U.S. used it. People there, the indigenous people, were living in essentially shanty towns, had no food. They were suffering under Batista, who was a fascist and a racist. They are they're always. And so basically, the United States actually imposed a economic embargo, which essentially encircled this island without being able to trade, import, or export with anyone else. So of course, when you are a small, tiny little island and you can't trade your coconuts for someone's medical supplies or syringes or things like this, you're going to be underdeveloped. And actually, the U.S. said that they wanted to put forward these embargoes, which would call forth a line of action, which, even though they wanted to be inconspicuous, makes the greatest inroads in denying money and supplies to Cuba, to decrease monetary and real wages, to bring about hunger, desperation, and eventually the overthrow of their government. And this still happens to this day. So, historical materialism. This one is just a meme, so like take it with a grain of salt, but like I think it's so funny and it's so true. So, examples of historical materialism. Communists took my home. They destroyed our family business. We fled to the US because they took everything from me. A lot of the times, the family was the bourgeois existing off of the backs of the people. This was the home, the family business with slaves, or some sort of exploitative situation. So I just thought that was a funny meme. That's doing historical materialism. So, bourgeois idealism. America's the greatest country on earth. That is why millions of people immigrate or flee to the US, right? We hear of all these people who are coming to the US. That must mean that we're better, right? So here's a little bit of historical materialism. War, coups, assassinations, all these things. When you look back, you can't just take a society and judge it for how it is now. You have to understand where it comes from. You have to understand what it went through, what class was in charge, what class was oppressing, how they were being oppressed, all these things. So the United States, a lot of these countries that we get immigrants from have been so destabilized by war and sanctions and coups and assassinations, all these things, that we have to understand materially lead to immigration.
That expropriation of the third world has been going on for 400 years, brings us to another revelation, namely that the third world is not poor. You don't go to poor countries to make money. There are very few poor countries in this world. Most countries are rich. The Philippines are rich. Brazil is rich. Mexico is rich. Chile is rich. Only the people are poor. But there's billions to be made there, to be carved out and to be taken. There's been billions for 400 years. The capitalist European and North American powers have carved out and taken the timber, the flax, the hemp, the cocoa, the rum, the tin, the copper, the iron, the rubber, the bauxite, the slaves, and the cheap labor. They have taken out of these countries. These countries are not underdeveloped, they're overexploited.
I know, such an iconic video. If you guys haven't Googled Yellow Parenti, that is just, it's just iconic. You have to watch it. Michael Parenti is a Marxian theorist. He does an incredible job of breaking down these concepts. I would say him and Kwame Ture are like the reason why I'm a Marxist. But yeah, it's super interesting. A lot of, like, learning from before, dialectical materialism between idealism and materialism. We learned that a lot of like struggles in history have been over resources or, things that you fight over. And so we can see that now. We don't just hear there's an immigration problem. People want to come to America because we're free and they want our freedom. We understand as Marxists that there has to be a reason. We have to ask why. Remember in 101 is democracy for who? Freedom for who? What class? So that's just a little bit of historical materialism. Now we're going to look into examples of what no historical materialism does to a motherfucker. So This is an example of people who are not using materialism to describe history, right? They're seeing it in a vacuum. Nothing happens in a vacuum. Everything that we have today has been built. Nothing that you have around you hasn't been built by the labor of people before you. So this is, I hate to show it to you guys, but I just have to. So, I know, this motherfucker does not use historical materialism. He thinks that history started on October 7th, and it's crazy. And we witness this and we see it. We're seeing it all around us, right? It seems like capitalism is devolving into this thing where people, like, reality doesn't exist anymore. Nothing started October 7th. It was just like the Al-Aqsa flood happened, and 1,400 Israelis and babies were burned in ovens, and all these things were just, you can just say something, right? No materialism. But that's why we need both of these things. We have to understand the science that goes into this. It's super easy and actually an incredible tool for fascists and capitalists to use. No historical materialism, because it's easy for them to act on feelings. As much as Ben Shapiro is coined or is known for knowing facts don't care about your feelings, sure as hell isn't using facts as to why, how, when, who, where did these people come from? Why did they fight back? What's going on there? So these are people who quite literally can't or don't or won't, I don't know, understand that history started before them, before October 7th. It's just so crazy. So here's another thing, and it truly pains me, and I'm so sorry, but I saw it, so you have to see it too. Feel free to laugh, feel free to cry. I'm sorry.
Anger at Israel is Hamas's secret weapon. This anger fuels them, legitimizes them, funds them to continue attacking us and to terrorize Jews around the world. That's why Hamas is doing everything they can to ensure that civilians in Gaza die in the war that Hamas dragged us into. That's why Hamas uses ambulances and why they put their headquarters under hospitals. That's why Hamas prevents people from evacuating a war zone, why they don't mind when their own rockets land inside Gaza, why they steal food, water, electricity, and fuel from the very people they're responsible for. Hamas is doing everything they can in every possible way to ensure that civilians in Gaza die just so that they can blame it on Israel, just so that you will be angry. I want to be clear. Everything we're doing in Gaza now to dismantle Hamas, we're doing because we have to. We have to make sure that there are no rockets left to fire at us, no tunnels left to infiltrate our homes. We have to make sure that October 7th, 2023 is the last tragedy that any of us ever have to live through or not live through.
Yeah, nice accent, right? I just point that out because without historical materialism, you can literally say whatever you want. You can say that they're making us kill them. It's insanity. And so, like I said before, we all know, like, a lot of us think we're good people, right? But there are other people who think they're good people doing very, very, very bad things. So sometimes you can't rely on morality. Sometimes you can't rely on these, like, concepts of good versus evil. And you have to use science and history and materialism to break down truths, because that's going to be the most important thing. And that's what we should focus on. Otherwise, it all gets muddled. And we're living through a time where everything is so muddled and it's hard to decipher what the truth is. So this is just such an important tool for us. And you use dialectical materialism on history to find out why. You hear all these bad things. Like, I'm still doing my research, but you hear a bad thing about a country, right? Where did I hear it? Who is that narrative benefiting? How much is my country, like Cuba, for example? It's like, we've heard that they've had a dictator. Did anyone ever think to, like, look into their voting process or anything like that? Like, once I started hearing that and I looked into it, I've been to Cuba a bunch of times. We did, like, some what's the word? Voting, election witnessing, whatever that's fucking called. But you went to see their process and you learn how they engage democratically with their society. It's like, dude, do people just make things up? And the answer is yes. Yes, they do. We live in the most propagandized society in the history of the world. So just take everything with a grain of salt and I know everyone always says do your own research, but truly work back and forth through these concepts and really find the sources and just get to the bottom of it. So historical materialism allows us to shed the ignorance of thoughts, feelings, and belief to see clearly the cause and effect of world events, both historical and contemporary. So these are just some examples. I wanted to prove, obviously, just in case someone was in here that was like, but October 7th, we need to make sure like 2019, 2020, all these different times. We all know that, I'm sure. But yeah, history, nothing happens in a vacuum. There's always a cause and effect, and there's always different factors. So we just have to all take that into consideration. Wanted to ask y'all, what are some other examples of history that we can apply a materialist lens to? If anyone has an example or just something that they worked through on their own to figure out. Yes, Jamie. You want to use the mic? Sorry, I don't think I'll be able to repeat it if it goes on.
I mean, there are always those T-shirts of like back-to-back world champs or World War champs, like and America won World War II, when the majority of the Nazi high command is who went on to establish NATO. The U.S. granted asylum to most of the Nazi high command and then put them into NATO, and they proceeded to run like the international defense system for the next like 30 years. Were like people that were Nazis in Germany, not like, yeah, pretty crazy.
That is a great example. But just, yeah, that sort of things like that. Once we realize that it's like fascism wasn't defeated, we took them in. I just realized I looked at the time. We saw so much to go through, so I'm so sorry. But yeah, I hope I didn't beat into you guys historical and dialectical materialism too much, but that is probably the two most important things that Marx gave us. Here's another little meme, just because it's the progress of history, right? In slavery, people would tell them, a society better than this? There are people telling other people, it's like, oh, I'm lucky, honestly, like my master lets me sleep in the house sometimes or gives me a little snack or whatever. Feudalism, a society better than this? Get back to work. Capitalism, they tell us all the time, you're dreaming, it doesn't work on paper, all these things. But we have to know that history will progress with or without us. And so it's up to us to change us. And honestly, we just had a volunteer orientation, and I think the theme of All Power Books this year is a new world needs a new you. And what we recognize is that no one's coming to save us, and the only thing that we can do is interfere in our own lives to make the changes necessary to make the changes in the world, because people have done it in worse conditions, far worse conditions than us. So when we look at our own conditions through a materialist lens, we begin to see the cracks and faults of capitalism. We begin to see history for what it is and not what we wish it would be. I would love to think that the US kicked out the Nazis and did all that stuff. I would love that, right? But it's not the material reality. We see our relationship with capitalism clearly. Through Marx's revolutionary theories, we can accurately name, target, and intervene in the root causes of exploitation. Oops. Why can't we afford rent? Why does it seem like no matter how hard we work, we can't stay afloat even with record profits and a thriving economy? And Marx has some answers. So we're going to get more into the economic side of Marxism. We're going to start with surplus value. This is the thing you're going to want to pay attention to, because it is profit. This is how you are being exploited. Surplus value explains how each and every one of us is getting exploited. So this is just a video. I was gonna explain it, but I realized I found this TikTok video that just explained it so much better than I ever could. So we're just gonna watch this.
So again, let's use the Starbucks thing as an example and break it down. Let's say a barista can make 20 drinks in an hour, which are then sold for $5 each. Through their labor, using the machines and combining the coffees and creams and syrups, they're able to generate $100 worth of profits for Starbucks in just an hour. But they're only paid minimum wage, which is what, $11? Where does that remaining $89 go? It goes to Starbucks. It goes into the pockets of the people who own the company, despite them not being involved in the labor needed to make those frappuccinos at all. They did buy the materials, sure, but the barista generated the value of the commodity made from the materials. But they don't actually get to benefit from that labor. They're only paid a fraction of the value of their work. This is what Marx termed as surplus value, the difference between the total worth of the worker's labor and the actual amount of compensation they were paid. That difference, that surplus value, is kept as profit by the capitalist. And that right there is exploitation. The profit-driven capitalist economy relies on the undercompensated labor of the workers.
She explains it well, right? Like every hour that you work after you made back the money for the capitalist, you're working for free, essentially. And that's the profit that the capitalist keeps and doesn't share with you and invests in more capital. And that's why the rich stay rich and the poor stay poor. Here's just another, more of a, if you're a graphic learner, he was the first to discover the scientific source of inequality under capitalism, where a worker labors for 8 hours a day. These are just numbers I picked. I hope no one's making $10 an hour. That would be crazy. But I mean, I think that's pretty, a lot of people are. So they're paid $10 an hour or $80 a day, right? They walk away, and that's not if it's not tax. That's if it's cash, right? But the commodity that the worker produces each hour, like let's say somebody's working at Starbucks or Boba Time or at a furniture building, IKEA or something, and they make every hour the capitalist is selling that product for $160. The capitalist has invested an average about $100 a day on wages, machinery, materials, insurance, right? But every hour after the initial investment and your wages repaid, which was probably less than the hour taken to make one, the capitalist makes a profit of $150 an hour. Because if they only invested whatever, I had to do the math on this. I don't know if it's right. I'm not a math person. But essentially, that, which means part of your work is paid and part of it is unpaid. And that, my friends, is capitalism. That is capitalist exploitation right there. Here's another graph to just explain it a little bit better too. You have an 8-hour workday. There's the necessary labor time. I highly recommend reading Marx's Capital just because he goes way more into like labor time, the socially necessary time, and all these things that explain this a lot better than I can in this 102 class. But essentially, you have all this time. It only took you, 15, 30 minutes to make the amount of money he's making in your wage, and the rest of the time you're just working for free. The labor share, they take it. Profit for capitalists is unpaid labor to the work of the workers. No democracy exists in our workplaces as the capitalist takes our surplus value and we have no say in where it is spent, where it goes, how to run the company, anything like that. So surplus value. Here's another little chart. This also shows the amount of wage theft in the United States, as it is the most stolen thing is your labor. These are all the minimum wage violations versus the amount of robbery that actually exists. But what does the media tell us to worry about? Robberies, burglaries, et cetera, crime, when really that's the amount of times you're being violated and not being paid your worth. That was a quick little run through. Oh, yes, Matisse. Exactly. For anyone who couldn't hear, this chart doesn't even account for your actual labor time. This is the wage that they're paying you, which is already a ripoff. That's already a ripoff, and this is how much they're ripping you off even more. And that is why we have billionaires. That is why we're having almost trillionaires. Do we have a trillionaire yet? Okay, almost. Oh, God. Yeah, true. All right. Labor theory of value. So a lot of this stuff, like I said, is more the economic side. It's less like conceptual or philosophical. So it is a little bit more just like that, but we can get through it, I think. The labor theory of value. So when human beings use their skills to change like raw materials into something useful, like taking a piece of wood and turning into a chair or table, They create something that was just useful into something that's valuable, right? When this table is sold as a product, it takes on like a new identity and becomes more than just like a physical object. It's not just wood anymore. It's like art. It's something that's valuable, like I said. It becomes a commodity that is traded and valued in the market. This transformation can give rise to like strange and fascinating ideas about the product that go beyond its original form and purpose. So commodities are super interesting. Commodity, the key to understanding it, capitalist economy, lies in the understanding of what a commodity is, right? So a commodity, in simple words from like Google or whatever, is a substance or products that can be traded, bought, or sold. So we have to make sure we understand completely what that is. Parents who bake bread to feed their family, that's not a commodity. Just like we talked about personal versus private property, there's two kinds of property, and it kind of relies on your relations with the means of production. So if you didn't do 101, I would go back to the 101 class just to understand the means of production and these two different types of property. But bakers who produce like a big amount of bread and they sell it on a market, those are commodities. So just because bread exists, it's how it's used is what Marx discovered. How it's used is whether or not it's a commodity, right? Through the capitalist system, by selling our bodies and time to a capitalist for a wage, the workers themselves become a commodity and we are bought and sold on the market, right? We are exchanged for our lowest value. We quite literally scramble to see who can pay us. Well, we obviously want to get paid the most, but a lot of the times the worker or the capitalists are trying to see who can keep us paid the least. Corporations actually lobby to keep wages down and to keep rents high. And what's insane is in 2022, I think it was recent. Restaurant workers, I forget where it was, but they didn't realize that a lot of their surplus value and a lot of they had these like taxes that were being added onto their paycheck that was going to pay for lobbyists that were fighting in DC to keep their wages low, to fight against the fight for 15, all these things. So sometimes in capitalism, we quite literally aid and abet our own oppression. Corporations pump up CEO pay while the low-wage workers suffer, especially during the pandemic. We saw that. That is brazen, right? The pandemic woke up a lot of us to our own exploitation because it was just so brazen. So now that's why we saw all the transfer of wealth, like trillions of dollars from the working class into the upper echelons of society. This is just a little graph I found that showed how much you would actually have to make to be able to afford housing in Los Angeles. Obviously, our minimum wage is like $15.50, but to be able to like rent comfortably, you would have to make like $33 an hour. But it's about state housing wage average is about $42.25, and so we're obviously making nowhere near that. And so something's got to give, right? They're not just gonna like start paying us more. Why would they do that? Yeah. And so, like my friend here said, we got to make them. And that comes from this like conflict between the bourgeoisie and the working class. I put this in here because I didn't go over them. This is a 102 class, but these are more like economic things that to understand how we're being exploited. Oh my goodness, there are so many ways up and down and sideways that we're getting freaking exploited. You have to understand the use value, exchange value, socially necessary labor time. That's just like how long an average it takes to like make something, and that kind of justifies its worth, right? But these we're gonna skip until next time. Through all of this exploitation, all of the harshness of our material reality as the working class, it does take a toll on our psyche. That's why we're all here. It's why we're all trying, we're depressed and shit. We can experience immense dread, isolation, and loneliness. And this is Marx's theory of alienation. Alienation. So Marx's theory of alienation describes the experience of human life as meaningless, or the human self as worthless in modern capitalist society. And right, they actually capitalize on that as well. The for-profit healthcare system. We talked about mental health earlier, the idea versus material. Here's a fantastic video that I found. There's so many resources, so many working class people who have taken time out of their lives to create content or create easier ways to understand these concepts. But here's a little video that just explains it better than I ever could.
To Marx, this economic system of capitalism thrives on exploitation and creates widespread unhappiness through what he calls alienation. For starters, I am alienated from the fruits of my labor. If I create a turnip, it'll be sold to another. And in exchange, I'll be paid a wage and become as much of a commodity as the thing I produce. Thus, I am removed from my work. I do not see myself in my labor. Capitalism also alienates us from each other. For the worker to produce efficiently, the capitalist tells them they are in constant competition for their job, thereby turning our fellow man into an adversary rather than an ally. Furthermore, capitalism alienates us from our very nature. Creating is a great source of satisfaction for our species. But because we are forced to make things that we have no personal investment in, our lives become a burden. As time goes on and industrial powers become increasingly concentrated among a select elite, the gap between the working class and the capitalist powers become increasingly concentrated among a select elite. The gap between the working class and the capitalist will only become wider. To Marx, this gap will eventually become so pronounced that the workers, in their profound frustration, will rise up and overthrow the oppression of the few and usher in a new society. A society in which there is no private property, there are no class divisions, where people's labor is held for the common good, and where all work according to their ability. And that, my friends, is communism. Even today, Marxism is one of the most powerful ideologies in the world. And to some, the ushering in of the Marxist utopia still lies in the not-too-distant future.
So yeah, we went over in 101 that like Karl Marx's Communist Manifesto is the #2 selling book in the entire world, second only to the Bible. We saw that it's been like practiced and read in more countries, and the ideas spread faster than Christianity in a shorter amount of time. Yeah. So that it's a super interesting topic, right? We think that if we can overthrow the society that it is, turn it on its head. Last week we did the triangles, the little pyramids of how class society is. If we flip that and have the workers retain the power, we can also decide where our surplus value goes, right? We'd still need to have all of these industries and all these things to get people the items that they need. A lot of people think that communism means like no private property, but they don't understand the differences between private and personal property. So in that video, we saw that there are 4 types of alienation. Alienation from the product, where you are forced to sell your labor and you don't own like what you produce. You have nothing to do with it. You're isolated from production because the capitalist system of mass production kills the creative spirit, leaving workers unable to find satisfaction in their labor. Workers are alienated from their unique and distinctively human nature and potential, particularly the power to create and enjoy beauty by the dueling effect of living in a capitalist society. So other workers, it puts us in competition with each other, right? We're all having to fight over our position, our wage, and it isolates you and alienates you from your own soul. How many of us feel empty inside because everything that we love has become monetized, right? It's just like capitalism just really freaking beats us down. And you're not alone, actually.
Cool Ideas by famous philosophers, Karl Marx, alienation. Alienation is the divorce between your essence and existence, the inescapable disillusionment of spending your days building things that are never yours. It is in this process you lose what is human about you, the yearn to create, and all that's left is the animal within you, the desire to consume.
That video is funny, but there's more.
I swear therapy only works until you bring up capitalism. Like I told my therapist that I feel alienated and dehumanized at work. I feel like they just say jump and I have to say how high. And she's like, but have you tried buying a planner?
I don't want to work anymore because I'm working every day very hard and I never had money. Fucking shit. So everything is expensive, motherfucker.
I'm tired of working, man. I don't know about you, but I'm tired of going to these jobs. It's not even about my particular job. It's not about any job I've had. I'm just tired of the whole job system. I'm tired of this understanding or this belief that we have to go to work 5 to 6 to 7 days a week to barely afford to eat. I mean, who made these rules? Why do we do these things? Who made it to where someone told us, yeah, 40 hours a week or more, you're going to make this amount and you're going to work this difficulty. You're about, what, I don't know, 65, and then you're going to retire and maybe barely have a fucking enough to actually survive. And then guess what? In about 2 or 3 years, you're going to die, or you're going to die before you even fucking hit 65. I digress. I don't know about you all, but I'm tired. I'm sorry. Sometimes I get a little emotional. Sometimes you got to make yourself laugh in the pain. I'm tired, bro. I don't know about you, but I'm tired, man. Yeah, and at this point, it's just like, dog, it's not even about looking for another job. I'm tired of looking for jobs. I don't even want to put in a job application. I'm tired of Indeed. I'm tired of ZipRecruiter. I'm tired of people scamming you. Oh, we got this job for you, but it's really not a job. It's some job in Malaysia or Asia or somewhere overseas. You don't even speak the language. It's man, I'm tired, man. I'm tired. Some people will say, oh man, that means you're lazy. I don't give a fuck. That makes me lazy. Oh well. Oh well.
So yeah, I mean, those videos just show us we're not alone, right? We all can find something in those videos that we agree with. I felt that so many times. But I also wanted to mention, like earlier we were talking about facts don't care about your feelings. Those were a lot of feelings, right? That's just the feeling of alienation. But this is a 101 and 102 class, and I wanted to keep it easy. Marx is not so much about feelings. He's a lot about the scientific process. And even though the feelings are real, but the feelings are consequences or symptoms of the system. The core of alienation is an actual social relationship and an actual material fact. It's described as an actual material, like economic fact. And if you look more into it, you can see the reasons why. It's not just like a general atmosphere of societal feelings. There's reasons why we feel alienated. Let's see here. Does anyone want to read this quote for me? Shout it out.
The boss imposes the kind of work, the method of the rhythm that he never bothers with the worker and himself is here appended with flesh on the environment.
Absolutely. So that leads us to our final theory, Marxian theory, and the final thing on the Marxism 102, which is revolutionary or conflict theory. So from 101, we learned that the capitalist society is divided into two opposing classes, right? That's what we did with the pyramids. We learned that the proletariat are workers who sell our labor in exchange for wages, and the bourgeoisie are the private owners of the means of production who pay us for our labor. And when we look back in history, we see that the conflict between the oppressed and oppressors have been the driving forces of change. Here's another TikTok video that explains conflict theory. I just feel like the TikTok sometimes can be so good.
I want to start a series where I talk about Marxism, so here we go. On today's episode, we're going to cover conflict theory. Conflict theory, first developed by Karl Marx, is a theory that society is in a state of perpetual conflict because of competition for limited resources. It basically states that tensions and conflicts arise when resources, status, and power are unevenly distributed between groups in society, and that these conflicts become the engine for social change. In a capitalist society, there are two classes. One is the bourgeoisie, or the owners of the means of production. These are the people that own the means of which society produces its wealth. So they own the corporations, they own the stores, they own the factories, the stuff that produces value. The other class is the proletariat, or working class. Now, this class doesn't own any means of production, right? The working class doesn't own factories, they don't own stores, they don't own businesses or corporations. Therefore, the only way we can make a living is by selling ourselves or our labor power to our employers or to the bourgeoisie in order to make a living. Now, the working class is the class that produces the value of society by doing the actual labor necessary to produce the value. Marx theorized that the bourgeoisie, being the powerful minority class, and the proletariat, being an oppressed majority class, will always inevitably be at conflict because of the interests of the two being at odds and the resources being unjustly distributed among them. For example, 1% of the wealthiest Americans own 16 times more wealth than the bottom 50% of Americans. And it is these conditions that lead to inevitable class conflicts between the two classes. And this idea that the two classes have conflicting interests shows itself with the fact that your employer is always trying to pay you as little as possible to do as much work as possible, while you, as a proletariat or working class member, are trying to do as little work as possible and get paid as much as possible. Marx theorizes that out of these conflicts, the working class will gain a better quality of life. The conflict between the two classes is the reason we have an 8-hour workday, the reason we have a minimum wage and can't be exploited like they were in the early industrial revolution. However, Marx also theorized that if we concede and accept these concessions and the conflict gets appeased to maintain a capitalist system, then the cycle of conflict will just keep repeating. However, if the changes made created a new system like socialism, then peace and stability could be achieved. Basically, so long as a minority ruling class oppresses a majority working class, conflict is inevitable. And this is why we need to take economic and political power away from a small group of elite people and into the hands of the majority working class, because that is the only way we can actually establish a truly democratic society.
So yeah, we are living in a tiny window of history, right? But we saw and we know through historical materialism that it's inevitable that it will progress. Something has got to give. We feel like we're at a head right now, right? It's insane. So we cannot think that this is all there is and all that has ever been. Systems change, empires fall, history marches on. But how does it change? How do we not devolve into fascism? How do we not just keep this cycle repeating over and over and over? Revolution. Ladies and gentlemen, theys and thems, revolution. So Marx actually theorized revolution as well. And many scholars have in all over the different continents in all the world. We have a ton of authors who theorized, lived through, or developed revolutions in their countries. There's a revolutionary sequence where there's an economic crisis, the immiseration of the proletariat, where we become super unsatisfied. I said we were here during revolutionary class consciousness, but I would say we're in a little bit of both. Like, we're still struggling, and it's hard to get people's consciousnesses, whatever that word is, to raise and be on the level of class consciousness. A lot of people want to identify more with the bourgeoisie. They want to think that they're just a temporarily embarrassed millionaire. These words are hard. And so then there would be the seizure of state power, which would be the revolution, where we would have this dictatorship of the proletariat, which the word dictatorship scares everyone so much, but really we would have to oppress the ruling class. They're not just gonna let us take power and be fine with it. History has shown us this. That's why it would be completely naive to think that it will just be peaceful. We could have a peaceful revolution. There have been peaceful revolutions. In Grenada, there was a peaceful revolution. They didn't arm themselves. Maurice Bishop was assassinated. Rest in peace. A lot of things. I mean, even if they're not peaceful, even if they are violent, you fight your way, they're still going to fight back. And then they're going to step on your grave, and they're going to tell everyone that you were evil, that they were the good ones. So this is just a sequence that Marx saw. Sometimes it's this, sometimes it's different. Every revolution in every context is different and turns out different. Different historical periods, different geographical areas, different contexts, etc. So yeah, after the dictatorship of the proletariat, that would be socialism, right? We went over that in 101. That's where the workers hold the majority of power, and the state still exists to be able to usher in this new system, to be able to defend ourselves against the various external factors as well. Like if we had a revolution in the United States, do you think France and Germany is gonna let that happen? Do you think the capitalists in Switzerland, in Europe, in Saudi Arabia, do you think they're gonna let that happen? I don't think so. So eventually, after however long it takes to defend the project, there would be the ultimate withering away of the state, because there would be, the surplus value would be decided by the people. All of the profits made by these factories and institutions would be divided amongst the workers, and then amongst to build better roads, to build better infrastructure, public transportation, mental health resources, education, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, ultimately leading to a communal society of communism. We are facing class divisions right now, economic inequalities, exploitation, perpetual wars, climate crisis. But all of us, we are the working class. There's more of us than there are of this elite few. Revolutions have happened before in conditions much worse than ours. The fulfillment of human potential and social needs can be achieved, but only if we try. Like I said, there is no one coming to save us. How can we expect that? We have to take charge, intervene in our own lives, to intervene in our communities, to intervene in our societies, to make a change. We have to try, and we have tried, and it's fantastic. This is Hollywood. During the Black Lives Matter uprisings in 2020, there was 100,000 people in the streets. We have the sympathies. We have the people. This was 3rd Street in front of the Trader Joe's on there with the police repression, and there was a burning cop car. You guys remember that? I think I have that next. Remember that? How fun was that, right? That felt good. That felt fucking good, right? So yeah, there's been, in the United States, there's been so many attempts, so many trials. We have all of the different people who are fighting back. Everyone knows, everyone can feel it. But like I said, we have to become class consciousness. We have to understand that we are a majority. We went over in 101, the differences in class. A lot of people were confused over these rich people. It's like, how can an athlete be working class? They make so much money. But they sell themselves. They sell their bodies for a wage. They get paid. Ultimately, they are not the ones. It's their owners. It's people above them. So there are a ton of us. There are a bunch of different class traders we can get on our side. There's a ton of different ways that we can ultimately fight back. This is Comrade Aaron Bushnell. There's a lot of different types and ways. There's individual protests, there's lone wolves, there's all these different factors that go in, but there are ways that we can disrupt the status quo. So this is Union de Vecinos. This is there's Comrade Sam over there. This is in Los Angeles. We got some people who are fighting every day. And that's the most important part. A lot of time, I put these two kind of close together because this obviously is a huge symbolic sacrifice, right? But there's also more of this. If you join an organization, that's going to be our best and more effective way to enact change. We have to be organized. We have to have a strong political line. We have to agree on our demands. Yeah, there has to be a consensus, and we all know it's coming. So I just wanted to kind of wrap this up and finish this out with a little bit of a meme, and it's a little nerdy, and I'm sorry, but I find it incredibly inspiring because as we went over 101 and in 102, and as you guys are going to learn from the various texts and the philosophers and the revolutionaries in the past, that we're not alone. This is a constant struggle. It's a constant struggle that has been laid down. The legacy is there. It's before us. All we have to do, the wheel has been made. We just got to push it forward. So, communists in 1870 said, I just finished reading Das Kapital in between shifts at work. 1870, the Communist Manifesto. That's when they first started realizing that they were being exploited, or started actually documenting that. 1905, we just overthrew the Tsar, set up a Soviet in Moscow, and seized a battleship. Shouts out Battleship Potemkin. Communists in 1920, tomorrow I will march through -20-degree snow in Siberia to face the armies of the Tsar and all of the imperial powers of the world. This is a struggle that has been going on for centuries. 1935, tomorrow I will march thousands of kilometers through the Shanxi, you would know, Shanxi Mountains and keep the Chinese Revolution alive. 1945, the Nazi Empire has been destroyed and we have brought peace to Europe. All communist struggles, all people who have taken the power and recognized their power and organized themselves. In 1949, we built a united China and ended the decades of violence and banditry, the centuries of humiliation by their oppressors, by the colonizers. 65, we beat the Japanese, we beat the French, now we'll beat the Americans to liberate Asia once and for all. Shouts out Vietnam, right? Communists in 1975, I just broke free of our colonial occupiers, and tomorrow I will liberate the rest of Africa from the colonial overlords and their puppets. It's a constant struggle. We too used to be like you, and one day you will be like us. Our legacy lives in you, comrade, and we have left you all of the tools that you need to finish the revolution and bring about the final victory for the working class, to create everlasting peace and freedom. 100 generations live in you. Do us proud. as the workers, we don't have anything to lose but our fucking chains. Like, come on. So this is a recap of 102. We went over dialectical and historical materialism. I hope you guys understood it. I will be taking questions. We went over the labor theory of value, surplus value, alienation, and revolutionary theory. And I also just wanted to suggest, this is all Power Books. We are completely ran by volunteers. Everyone that's ever here that you ever see is a volunteer. We decided to intervene in our own lives, take away our essential individualism, and try to create a better world. And there's a lot of places like this to support any place like this. Join an organization, build with our comrades. We have the tools, we have the knowledge, we have the analysis to be able to understand the world around us, intervene, and show people how we can build a better world. So this, leads to our Venmo. If you guys want to throw us a couple bucks, that would be great. But does anyone have any questions? Yes. Oh, on the mic.
So actually, for context, I told you to stay. Always a diva. So, Kushi. So for context, when the 2020 uprising happened, it reminded me a whole lot actually of what was going down in my home country. For context, I'm South American, and specifically this big blue and red flag over here. That's the one I'm from. And they have a saying back there. They say "coupe tête boule caille." It basically means to incinerate and decapitate. And yeah, I know it sounds like it's funny, but actually it is not a joke. Like, things were so dire during the 1400 to the 1800 era that people were actually saying that. Like, well, if we're going to be slaves anyway, we might as well incinerate and decapitate everyone that enslave us. But I think what a lot of people maybe don't realize, there's a big mental health component that exists within this context of revolution. And I'm very curious to hear some of these thoughts in terms of managing the expectations that comes with the mental health aspect of it. Because me personally, I'm not gonna lie to you, I stay off of social media for that very reason. I'm tired of my day-to-day being full of triggering imagery. And I myself actually have been victim of a stabbing wound from a Nazi, literally right here. So there's a big cost for me mentally to be involved in stuff like this. And I want to hear some actual practical tool to use to be able to kind of keep myself safe in that regards. So thanks.
Thank you for this question. Tony, this question is really fantastic. I will have to say, though, unfortunately, because this is a Marxism 101 and 102 class, and we're not theorizing revolution, we're not planning revolution, we're not discussing tactics or strategies, I am going to have to maybe not answer that, because that is a little bit of an offline discussion. If that makes sense. I think that is going to be, obviously, there's something I didn't mention too. Revolution is super easy to say, right? It's something for me especially, revolution, yeah, cool. You know what I mean? Especially if, I did say we have nothing to lose our chains, and so did Marx. But essentially, I understand everyone is living these lives. They have family, they have friends, they have jobs. All of this is really hard. What I do suggest is finding your place in revolution, finding your place in struggle. That could be propagandist, somebody in agitation, somebody in education, theorizing. That's what we love to do here at All Power Books, is develop people and what they're good at and find a place for them. We highly recommend joining an organization. Organizations, or a political party, they exist so if you ever have to take a step back, the struggle doesn't fall apart, because there's comrades that fill in that place for you and keep the ball moving. So it's super important to join an organization and to meet up with these people and build with people, and let them know if you're experiencing certain struggles like mental health or physical health or things like this. A lot of the times we live under capitalism. It's devastating. Everyone has a devastating story or a reason why you can't be somewhere at every protest. You just have to find what's comfortable for you But a lot of the times it's super, what I tell myself, like you're looking at me now, I'm a white girl, right? I think about the people in Palestine. There are people who are in the trenches. They're fighting in broken down buildings. There are tanks coming towards them and they have to sacrifice their lives. I've seen videos of them on their last moment sacrificing their lives against these tanks to protect their people and what they have. We have it really easy here in the United States. We're building revolution here. We're building revolution in Koreatown. We're building revolution at Project 43 in Crenshaw. There's little puzzle pieces for revolution everywhere. We have to find our place. But if my job to push the revolution forward is to come here and talk to my friends and do a little video TikTok thing for you guys, then I've got it pretty easy, and I can honestly sacrifice more, if that makes sense. Every day we're building ourselves up. I can't public speak to save my freaking life, but I forced myself to do these classes so that I would get in front of you and develop myself to be a better speaker so I can help educate. So we got to find what we're good at, jump into the revolution there, quote unquote revolution, it's very loose. We can also find what we're not good at and develop that, get better, build ourselves up every single day. And I don't know all the answers, obviously. That's why I suggest reading all of the theorists from before. That's why we taught you dialectical and historical materialism, so you can analyze the world around you and make your own decisions and join the organizations you really connect with. If you want to hand out food, if you want to do healthcare, we have some of our AP Free Clinic in here right now. Shouts out All Power Free Clinic. They're serving the people throughout Los Angeles. They're some of the most exploited people in the United States of America, healthcare workers. And they're still finding the time to go and do that healthcare for free, unpaid. They could be going to clubs, they can be going to movies, doing all these things, but instead they're in the streets helping people. Watching Lord of the Rings, I don't know. That's more likely. So yeah, that's just a little suggestion. And I would say, yeah, if we want to start theorizing and talking what revolution could look like and what we had learned from 2020 and Occupy and how we can develop stronger systems of defense and things like that, that's an offline conversation. So we'll keep talking, Tony. Anyone else have any other questions? Gage. 103, I would say, can I actually answer my 101 before even reading Marx? I think for me, I would have to imagine what a socialist society could look like in the United States of America. One of my favorite books I've read out of all of the books I've read is actually this book called Socialist Reconstruction. And it actually envisions what socialism in the United States could look like tomorrow. And that put in perspective to me how easily attainable these things are. How it's just like a shift in how the production is, spread out, stuff like that. So I would say, like for 102, definitely reading Marx. Capital's like this fucking big. So I'd say like Capital Illustrated. We also have here too, the All Power Press came out with the fundamentals of Marxism. This has like the Communist Manifesto, Principles of Communism, which is Frederick Engels. It's got Socialism Utopian and Scientific by Frederick Engels, and an essay called Why Marxism by Roderick Day. And it's just a good little thing to have at your house, just because it goes over all the fundamentals. So I'd highly recommend reading Marx, and then reading the people who took Marx and theorized it, like Ho Chi Minh, or Walter Rodney, Vladimir Lenin, all these people who took Marxism and applied it to their conditions in their time and made revolutions happen. I don't know. I mean, yeah, just read books, all of them, I guess. Yeah, People's Guide to Capitalism is great. Yeah. Any other questions? Yes. Oh, this is a great one. If you guys are interested in volunteering with All Power, we have sign-up sheets up here at the front. We would absolutely love to have you. We are doing volunteer orientations, bye Jamie, like once a month, where we'll talk you through our political line, who we are, what we do, and let you in on our events coming up and things that you can volunteer for. We're trying to build all encompassing, like upright citizens that give back to their community and build the power necessary to take power. We have our volunteer coordinators here with us. We got David and Esther right here in the back. Shouts out. So they're going to be who you talk to, who's going to be organizing the shifts and stuff like that. So please fill out the form if you're interested. And yeah, let's like all learn together, grow together, and build together. Because I do believe that there's a better society. And honestly, studying this stuff made it all the more real. So thank you guys so much. Oh, yeah. If you could just fold your chairs and put them in the gulag, as they say. Just because, yeah, we're a communal society in here. And no one is too good to fold a chair. So I'm going to help too.